Next, Sumner. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me first start with, again, the International Criminal Court. Most of you know of it? I know you would know because it's from The Hague, right? Okay. Yeah. Well, the International Criminal Court is an institution basically designed to be a permanent institution. And you see a picture of it here, and my friend Marcus will be working the slides. It's the first permanent institution to work on mass murder and genocide. Now, I said first permanent. There are institutions, there are tribunals for Rwanda, judicial institutions. There's tribunal for Sierra Leone and tribunals for Bosnia and Herzegovina. But they were all put together, and they're not permanent. They have sunset. But the International Criminal Court is a permanent institution brought about by the international community to fight mass murder and genocide. And this has a lot to do with Africa. It's intricately linked with Africa because, as many of you know, Africa has, within the last 20 years, I would say from 1990, in certain kinds of Central Africa, there's been mass murder, mass genocide, occasions, way too many occasions of rebel activity that's amounted to a lot of murder. And part of the responsibility of that comes from the governments themselves, and which I'll go from there. But I want to step back for a minute. The International Criminal Court, and I will go through how it's linked with Africa and how it's linked with the governments, because part of the session here is that you get some information, good information, to talk to your correspondents about what are good institutions or ideas to support good governance in Africa. So we'll go through that. The International Criminal Court came about in the 1990s when two countries got together and started floating an idea of an international, some sort of judiciary body to permanently begin to prevent mass murder and genocide. And the international community saw that these constant occasions of mass murder were not any good at all for Africa, not for Africa, but for the world. So there was a desire to have some sort of court institution that would work to handle some of these problems on a permanent basis. And that's all the crux of the thing, the whole crux of the equation. It came about in 1998 when they had what they call the Conference of Parties for the Rome Statute. And at that point in time, they started, the international community started to work out how they could have a protocol, an institution, how would it operate, what would be the parameters, what can it do, what can it not do. And it was very important to have that. Now, let me step back. It began in after World War II, everyone sees that as a definitive of mass murder and atrocities, of human atrocity. And before World War II, basically, when the victors of war would go out and just execute their belligerents, right? But World War II started a process in Nuremberg where they decided, let's have the rule of law and institute the idea that mass murder is a crime against humanity. And that was the big idea, that we have something called the crimes against humanity, and that we have now established laws that show and crystallize how they are, what you cannot do, and the fact that anyone who's in power, they're not immune to being held accountable for any mass murder they do. So that was all good and done. Then, as the years go by, mass murder didn't stop. You had Cambodia, Pol Pot. There was a mass murder there. The Khmer Rouge. Then you had Bosnia and Herzegovina in the 1990s. That came up. Then you had in the 1980s you had the DER in Ethiopia, which another mass murder. So mass murders were happening all the time, and not only were they happening, but they were outpacing judicial proceedings designed to address them. So for I gave the example of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, right? They just 2 years ago had hearings about that, and the Khmer Rouge happened in 1968. So that gives you an example how far away how far the action outpaces the judicial the judicial address to deal with these problems. So fast forward to the 1990s, and then you have Rwanda. Then after that, you have Sierra Leone, and you have Liberia, and the international community, particularly Africa, just says that's it, that we've had enough. And these problems, these constant rebel strifes that hit people, that hit ordinary people, that indoctrinate people into war, they do nothing for Africa. They do nothing for development. And so they, we have to address them in some way. So when the Rome Statute came about for the International Criminal Court, a lot of African countries jumped on board. Or didn't exactly jump on board at that point in time, but they were very much interested. And you know, some of the big problems, of course, with Africa was machete money, that is, people getting paid to kill a lot of people. We had Sierra Leone's blood diamonds. Don't have to go into Rwanda. So we had a lot of examples. And then, of course, South Africa was very much interested also in the International Criminal Court because it went through the years of apartheid. And apartheid has been seen as against crimes against humanity. So the idea of a permanent International Criminal Court actually prevents, it's proactive instead of retroactive. I mentioned the courts before, the tribunals. They all are set up after a genocide is done. And so what sense does it make to set up a court to address the genocide when the action's already done? So it really doesn't make any sense. So that's why the International Criminal Court came about. A lot of countries like the idea of an International Criminal Court. The country that I'm from didn't like, it was part of the process, and then after 2001, it didn't really want to be on board. But the world is much broader than the United States. So the necessary amount of countries that were needed to have an International Criminal Court was ratified, was there, and the UN, a lot of these countries to ratify, even though the International Criminal Court is not part of the UN. But they allowed these countries to ratify it, and then they had enough countries on board to create this institution. So it is a court institution. Marcus, first slide. I want to show you a few people, and what I want to talk about today is one condition where the International Criminal Court would be helpful in supporting good governance in Africa. And this person is Joseph Kony, right? He is the leader of the so-called Lord Resistance Army. I used to think that was a really strange name back 10 years ago when I first heard it, because this guy is committing all these atrocities and he's calling himself the Lord Resistance. It's really weird. Okay, so Joseph Kony is a person I'd like to key in on, and he's from Uganda. And there's a reason why I want to key in on Uganda also. In the next slide, Marcus. All right, that's Joseph Kony again also. And if you look in his background, you see him with children. Next slide. Okay, this is the person's name, Thomas Lubanga. He's from the Congo. Almost like Joseph Kony, same thing. He's fighting a rebel war against the government of the Congo. And he did something that's really dangerous to development in Africa. It's almost the same as Joseph Kony. Okay, and then that's Thomas also, Thomas Lubanga. And then this is Omar al-Bashir. He is the president of Sudan. And he's actually indicted by the International Criminal Court. So all these people, Joseph Kony, Thomas Lubanga, Omar al-Bashir, not so much al-Bashir, but they all have something in common. Now what would you think could be the most devastating thing to any country in Africa, any country in the world, that these people could do when they're fighting a war? What do you think would be the most heinous thing they could do? With that? Yeah, go ahead.
Using intelligence.
Exactly.